Welcome back, guys. Jimmy Jules 153 here, back with another episode of Short Circuits. Today we'll be learning how to build a power-up for your character. You can see here, the puppet is just a default puppet, running at the normal speed and able to jump at the normal height. If we run over one of these blue discs here, you'll see that it activates and then fades away. We're actually now able to run a bit faster, because the blue ones upgrade our running speed. If we get more of the blue discs, we'll be able to run even faster. So fast that we run off the edge. The green ones are a temporary power-up, and they let you jump higher. So they'll last for 5 seconds, and it'll give your player the ability to jump much higher than they're able to normally. The third one is an attack power-up. If I press the square button at the moment, nothing happens. But if I grab one of these red discs here, and press square again, it lets me kick. You can see if I run over to the dummy over here, and attack it, that it loses 10 health. If we get the rest of these, you can see that it now does 60 damage. So we'll be going through how to make these today. First of all, guys, we'll just quickly go through the pad and how I've made that. So I've just got 2 sculpts here, just a random cylinder and then a bit of a white ring around that cylinder just to make it look like it's active. I've then got a fleck and grouped that with the entire thing as well. And I've made this fleck just by using the kaleidoscope set to 5, so it makes 5 copies of the object that I make. A little trick with getting the flecks to clone nicely and work nicely on the kaleidoscope is to put down a center fleck first. So if you put down a fleck right in the center there, this is going to be where our kaleidoscope originates from. If we turn off the grid and turn on the kaleidoscope, and then just make a line, you can see that that first stamped fleck is where the center of the kaleidoscope originates from. Then to make it nice and tidy, you can just delete the center fleck that you originally stamped down, and the center of the kaleidoscope will still be in that spot. I've then just turned the clones on for this, and not spread them apart very far. Just a bit like so. The other fleck that we have is just the activation fleck, so when it gets activated, it just does a little bit of a pulse upwards to make it look like it's affecting your character. That's literally just a straight line up into the air, and I've just used the clone option from within the tweak menu. We'll drag that into a position that we're happy with there, and we'll jump into the group, and in that group we'll place a microchip. Now the very first thing we want to do with this is detect when the player is standing on it. And for that, of course, we'll use a trigger zone, and we'll just leave that on the default settings to detect the possessed controller sensors. We'll make this a cylinder. Let's get rid of any excess, because any excess you have affects the thermo when you don't need it to. And there we go. So now whenever our player is standing on this platform, that trigger zone will be activated. We're going to want a few things to happen in sequence here, so we'll grab out a timeline, and we'll also grab out a switch from the input section just here. So we've got something to turn things on with. And we'll also need something here to update the player's statistics. So in this case, with the blue one, we'll want to update their run speed. We're going to use a variable for this, because we want that variable to be persistent, so that even if we changed scenes or if we die, that number will stay consistent. We'll grab out a variable modifier here, and along with this we're going to need a world chip that's not attached to our player. On this world chip, I'll put down a variable, and we'll rename this one just to run speed. And for now, that's all we'll need on that world chip. Back over on our pad, we'll change the name of this variable modifier to look for the run speed variable. And when that gets activated, we want it to add a value of 1 to the run speed variable. We also want the pad to turn off once we've done that to make it look like it's no longer active. We'll use a switch to do this, and we'll fade the switch power on, and we'll do this by dragging the little fade dot from the left hand side to the right, and that's going to fade the signal in for us. And because we want things to turn off, we're going to need a NOT gate. We'll grab out a NOT gate here, and we'll just plug the signal from that switch directly into this NOT gate. So as the switch turns on, this NOT gate will turn off. We'll plug the signal from this NOT gate into the things that we want to turn off. So for example, I'll plug it into the transparency and the brightness of the fleck here. And while I'm at it, I'll plug it into the brightness of the base. So if we hit play here, you can see once it hits this switch, the fleck turns off and the brightness around the ring also turns off. We don't really want this to stick around after we've finished with it either, so we're going to make it fade into the ground. We'll just grab this keyframe here and we'll program in the default position. So we'll scope out of the group and just have that in the default position. Then if we duplicate that keyframe and move the group down into the floor, and we'll add a bit of a blend just by shift selecting the area between the keyframes. And then after that's all happened, we want the entire thing to be destroyed to free back up our thermometer. We'll put a destroyer down on our microchip here, and we'll grab the affected object output, make sure we're scoped all the way out of the group so that it selects the entire group, and attach that to the group itself. That way the destroyer will destroy the entire group once it's finished its animation. If we play that again now, you can see that it hits that, things fade away, and it fades into the ground, then gets destroyed. The destroyer isn't quite close enough to the keyframes there. It popped back up above the ground before it got destroyed, so we'll just test that again after we move the destroyer back a bit. Perfect. Alright, so that's just about all we need to do there. We also, however, want to add this little activation fleck in. So we'll scope into the group here, just by shift selecting the group while we're holding the object. And we want this to play once we've been detected by the trigger zone. We'll pull out another switch here just to activate this. And we'll plug this switch just directly into the power of that fleck. So now if we test one last time, it gets activated, fades away, goes into the ground, and gets destroyed. Now we only want this to happen when the player gets detected, so we're going to use this trigger zone to power our timeline. We also want to make sure that the timeline is set to play once, otherwise it may stop halfway through the animation on the timeline and not get destroyed. Alrighty guys, so I've just gone ahead and grabbed a default puppet here. This has just got a quick animation in it, but that's not active at the moment. I'll explain what that does shortly. So if we jump into play mode here and run over the top of that, it should do all of the animation, sink back into the ground, and get destroyed, which is perfect. So now, of course, we want our player's run speed to increase when we do that. To do that, on our player's logic, we'll grab out a microchip, and we'll make this the run speed microchip, just like so. And we're going to need a variable modifier. And we want this variable modifier to get the value of our run speed. We're going to use a signal manipulator to modify the signal that gets sent to our slider on the puppet to adjust that run speed. So if we open up the tweak menu here, we've got the run speed up the top, which is currently set to 5.4 meters per second as a default. In our signal manipulator, we'll open up the custom remapper option so that we can program in custom inputs and outputs. We'll drag our maximum output bar on the top right hand side of this all the way up to 10. And the minimum output we want to make sure is the minimum run speed. So for this we want 5.4. So that's exactly what I'm going to drag my little bar here to. Just to 5.4, like so. And we'll plug the output from the signal manipulator directly into that run speed. We'll also want to make sure that the blend type is set to overwrite. If you hold down Shift, hover over the tag that you've plugged the wire into and select it, you can change the blend type, and these do make big differences, so make sure you've got it on the right one. And just make sure you've got it set to the overwrite. This will overwrite the signal that you've set, so it doesn't matter what value you've put into the slider, it will overwrite this with the value that it's receiving. You can see, even though I've got it set to 14.2 meters per second, as soon as I get away from hovering over it, it defaults back to 5.4. The maximum output on the right hand side, we want to make sure is our maximum run speed. So let's say, for example, we wanted our maximum run speed to be 15 meters per second. We'll just change that to 15 there. So now we have our minimum run speed and our maximum run speed programmed directly into our signal manipulator here. It's going to take care of the conversions of the input signals for us. We'll plug the variable value directly into the signal manipulator. So you can see at the moment, because it's receiving 0 from the variable, it's outputting a signal of 5.4. If it was receiving 1 from the variable, it'd be outputting 15. Our variable is going to increment 1 at a time, so we'll need to increase our maximum variable input here. So let's say if we get 5 of the power-ups, then we should be at maximum run speed. So we'll change our maximum input here to 5. And we'll also make sure we clamp these values. Basically what this means is it's going to keep the inputs and outputs within the bounds of these ranges that we've set. If we don't clamp the values, the signals will be allowed to travel outside these bounds, which isn't what we're after here. That is literally all we need for our run speed power up. So we'll just shrink that microchip right down. And we will also shrink our global microchip down and pin that to our screen so we can see what's going on here. I'll jump into test mode so we can keep the microchips on the screen. So you can see at the moment the run speed is set to 5.4 meters per second on the right. If we grab this, it jumps up to 7.3. We can also smooth this transition as well with the signal manipulator. We can just have the output smoothing, set that to about 1 second for example. That's basically all we need to do for the run speed power up here. We'll drag this out and clone this a few times. Okay, I'll jump into test mode again with these out. We'll grab the first one. You can see down the bottom left it increases our run speed to 7.3 meters per second, 9.2, and it just increases. But because we've now reached 5, which is our maximum input signal for our signal manipulator, and we've also got that set to clamp values, it's not going to let that signal go over 5, and it will keep the run speed at 15 meters per second. If we didn't have it on clamp values, it would go over 15 meters per second, because the signal manipulator would stop restricting the bounds of the signal. This of course does not just apply to run speed, guys. You can apply this to literally any slider in the game. If you have something that you want to upgrade that has a slider, you can make this same setup and plug it into whichever slider you like. So for the next example, guys, we're going to be upgrading the jump height, and we're going to make this a temporary power up, so it's only going to last for a few seconds. We'll clone our run power up here, and we'll just make it nice and easy. We'll just change the colors of these flecks just to a different color so we can differentiate what they do. Now for our jump height, we'll make another microchip here. So because this is a temporary power up, we're not going to need to update any variables or anything like that. This is not going to be a permanent, consistent power up. It's just going to be for 5 seconds. We're going to use a very similar setup to our other run speed power up that we've already got going, except we're going to use a tag this time. And we'll just make sure the origin for this tag is in about the center of the character's body. Just like so. And we're going to make this trigger zone, instead of detecting all possessed controller sensors, we'll make it detect a tag, and we'll detect the jump height. We're going to remove our variable modifier from our setup because we won't be needing that, and that will update our run speed if we keep that on there, which is not what we want. And that's just about all we need to do to the pad. The rest of it is back on the player. So what we're going to need to do here is make a cooldown. To do this, the easiest way that I've found is to have a timer that's already full in the scene. We'll then grab out a NOT gate, and I'll show you why in just a moment. And we'll plug this timer finished signal directly into the NOT gate. We'll then plug this jump power up into the timer so that it starts this timer every time we hit a jump pad. Once the timer starts, it's no longer going to be finished, and it's going to activate this NOT gate. That NOT gate will then be active for however long we set this timer for. We're going to do a very similar thing to the run power up with the slider on the puppet again. We'll grab out a signal manipulator, of course, and we'll again go into the custom remap options, and we'll set our minimum just to our minimum jump height. In this case, our minimum jump height is 1 meter. So we'll drag our minimum on the right hand side just up to 1, and we'll plug the signal directly into that jump height. And again, we're going to change this blend type from modulate back to overwrite, and you can see now that because we've got it on that, it's going to overwrite the signal to the minimum of our signal manipulator, which is 1. If we increase this minimum, it's going to change the slider for us there too. Next, we want to set our maximum jump height, so when the power up is active, they will jump this high, so we'll set it to 3. So normally they'll jump 1 meter high, but when the power up's active, they'll jump 3 meters high. We don't need to change our input ranges here, because that is always going to be between 1 and 0, just because the NOT gate will be on or off, which is a 1 or a 0. Now when we grab this jump power up, it's going to, for 5 seconds, increase our jump height to 3, and then once it runs out, it's going to go back to 1 again. But we really have no indication to the player as to when that's going to run out. What we can do is put a number displayer above their head. So if I jump into the logic here and grab from the outputs a number displayer, and we'll want the number displayer to count down from the amount of seconds they have left. We'll grab out our calculator here, and because this timer is counting up, we'll need to reverse that count for the number displayer. What we're going to do is grab the total time and take away, change that to a minus, and we'll take away the current time. We'll just change this number displayer to be in the scene and above the player's head. So if we jump into test mode and we grab our jump power up, it increases our jump height, and you can see the countdown above his head as well. You could of course set this up the same way as the run so that it's a persistent power up, but this is just a way that you would do a temporary power-up. Again, this doesn't have to be for a jump, this can be literally anything with a slider. Last but not least, we're going to be grabbing out another pad here so that we can modify it. We're actually going to copy the first power-up pad here because that one has the logic that we need. This is again going to be a persistent power-up. We'll open up the microchip here, and we're going to need another variable on our world chip. And we're going to make this one kick and damage. Again, just to differentiate it, we'll change the color, and we'll update this variable modifier to update the kick and damage variable. Again, that's all we need to do for our power-up pad. The rest of the logic is on the player. We'll grab out one last microchip here, just for our punch. I'll grab out something to transition the player between the states of kicking and not kicking. In this case, we'll use a selector. And we're going to use the square button from the controller to make the player kick. I'll grab out a node here, just so we've got something to plug it into. And I'll just change that to the color of the button that we're using on the controller, which is purple or pink in this case. It's for the square button. And we're going to make that square button progress the selector to the next port. So by default, we'll be on port A, but then when we press square, we'll move to port B. We also want this input node to only be active when we're not kicking, which is when we're on port A, so we'll plug that node into port A from the selector. Now this is what this little animation was for here. I'll just grab this timeline already here, and we want this timeline to be active once we've pressed the square button, which is when port B will be active on the selector. Once the kick is finished, we want the player to be able to kick again, so we need a way to switch the selector back to port A again. The timeline has an on-end trigger output here, which we'll utilize, and we'll just plug that directly into the A port, so that whenever the player has finished kicking, it'll reset back to A and repower the node, so they can press the square button again and repeat the process. Now I've gone with a really simple kick here. I have not put much effort into this one at all, but you can of course put as much effort into your animation as you like. He's just sort of kicking the air here. And I've got a health modifier, which I've made a couple of tweaks to. I've just made it a zone, and I've made it a box that's in front of the player, about how far in front they would kick. So I just want him to do damage in this area here. At the moment, it's going to be doing -10 damage, but we will change this shortly with a signal. I've also made it not affect the friend label, so that it doesn't do damage to the player, and from the player's tweak menu under the labels section, I've just labeled them as a friend as well. This keyframe here just fades in and out, so that it slowly raises its leg and then puts it back down again. Now we'll grab out a variable modifier here, and we'll put this outside of the microchip, which is a bit strange, and we'll make this one look for the kick and damage variable. We're going to get that value, and we're going to plug that into the power of the microchip. So unless we've picked up one of the kick power-ups, we won't be able to kick at all. Once we have collected a kick power-up, it's going to activate this chip and stay activated. We'll use this variable modifier signal again to modify the signal in our health modifier. If we open up the tweak menu of our health modifier here and plug that into the modification amount slider there, we also want to make sure that our blend type is set to modulate here, because this will take into account the value that we've set and multiply it by the signal the slider receives. So for example, if this slider was to receive a signal of 1, it would be at -10. If it was to receive a signal of 2, it would be at -20. So with all that in mind, guys, I'll jump into test mode again, and we'll see how this works. Okay, so we'll walk over to our damage thing over here. So you can see if I press the square button at the moment, the signal is going to that node, but because the microchip is turned off, there's nothing happening. That microchip is turned off because we have not collected any of the kick power-ups just yet. As soon as we walk over the top of one of the pads, it will increase that variable to a 1. You can see that we can kick, but then as soon as we have kicked, it has to wait for that timeline to finish and for the selector to get triggered back to port A again before I can kick again. You can see at the moment my kicks are worth 10 damage. So if I go over to this dummy over here, you can see it does 10 damage to him. Now you can see when I grab a second pad here, you can see the variable down the bottom of my screen there will update. That's the kick variable. And my health modification amount will increase, or in this case decrease, to -20. The health modifier at the moment says -10 because it's powered off, but as soon as I power it on, it jumps up to -20, and it does -20 damage to the player. We can keep on grabbing these, and it will increase the damage that we do with our kick. Now guys, keep in mind, these are 3 really simple examples of power-ups, but this is the basic logic setup. I've given you 3 examples here, one with a permanent power-up, one with a timed power-up, and one with an activatable power-up. But if you've got any questions at all, definitely leave me a comment. I'll absolutely try and answer you. Anyway guys, I think that's just about all for the power-up tutorial. If you've got any questions, of course, leave a comment. This has been JimmyJules153, and I'll see you in the next one.